today, so let's go ahead and get started. Mr. King, please.
Okay, we had a couple requests for an update on the work being done by Catalyst, called Catalyst #1. Jason Ponch is here. Jason, go.
Good morning.
There he is behind me. And he's going to kind of walk you through what they've been doing. And we also had a couple requests about some specific programs nearby, and I think Jason got a little bit of information on another city's property acquisition programs, essentially what they are. So he's going to walk you through that, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask him whatever questions you want. So
I think Meek and I've been calling it confidential intelligence.
yes.
I guess we'll keep the lights on for the camera. Thanks for having me. This is always a pleasure to be here, and there's nothing more than what we enjoy doing is really educate on our findings and our processes. We certainly love what we do. Retail is exciting. Retail sales are up, retail activity is up, so we feel like we're certainly in a good space. Interesting enough, we're spending probably 20 or 30% of our time looking at residential capacity now, which is in multifamily projects, which I think will certainly help translate, hopefully in the short term to Lewisville as well. I'm going to go over quickly. Thank you. I'm going to go over quickly. Really kind of why we were engaged, just a reminder, ultimately the first part of this process is just to identify and understand market conditions. What is the market, what is the opportunity for Lewisville, and then certainly start to drill down and identify very specific retail opportunities that we can create and optimize value. We sort of take the data and the research that we've been doing over the last few months and apply that kind of on an asset-by-asset basis, and we'll get into more detail on that. We think looking at the socio-economic context in general is great, but ultimately what we try to do is take the data and make it actionable. And that's really where we kind of positioned ourselves on this last bullet point. Over 2/3 of our scope is gathering intel and making the case, but ultimately kind of the last third of our process is probably the most important, which we should start in the next 30 days, is actually refining this into an actionable plan, and then taking that plan out to market and building value propositions of why Lewisville on a tenant-by-tenant basis. So, ultimately, a plan is a plan. We really consider this a kind of a merchandising plan with a long implementation tail, so that over the next year or so, we'll be sharing our data with individual operators and making the case and hopefully creating some sales tax value. Very quickly, this is just kind of a sequence of our property. We were engaged to look at the Hebron TOD, kind of your downtown area as a reminder in the 1171. So we really applied these processes to all of those study areas. Part of our process was just visiting with the city, understanding work that had already been done so we could leverage off of that. But we've also been spending quite a bit of time interviewing individual property owners and figuring out where the individual opportunities are. Spend a lot of time understanding the trade area and gap analysis. We do that the most effective way is to measure existing shoppers and figuring out where they live in relationship to where they're shopping down to individual tenant levels. And I'll share with you some information that we've uncovered. And we use that data to formulate a true statistical geography, so we're not guessing on how many people and who are they. And we use that to formulate kind of the market analysis. We interview a majority of the properties, what we call the strategic economic assets, in each one of those study areas to get an idea of where their vision is, where their opportunity is, where their gap is. And then ultimately we take all this information, aggregate data, turn it into a merchandising plan, which is kind of our go-forward plan or our framework. And then ultimately, as discussed, we do the implementation as well. So once we formulate a strategy, we'll be visiting with staff, kind of refining that and optimizing that tenant list, and then we'll spend the rest of our time over the next year or so implementing that plan. So we talked a little bit about a trade area. This map is trade area. Each one of these red dots is a customer sample that we collected from an individual shopping center. So it's just one customer, one dot equals one customer. And this is a great way to show the distribution of where the customers are coming from that are shopping on the 1171 corridor. Through our process, we'll actually get enough samples from one individual location, one sample set to identify a trade area for a grocery store or general anchors or pharmacy or restaurants, so that we can actually take this data if we're pursuing restaurants and show the trade area for restaurants. This is an aggregate trade area, essentially of all the sampling that we did to define the overall master trade area for 1171. Is this clear? Does anyone have any questions on the process or what this means? Okay, I'll keep going. So essentially, this is the outline, or the red is the outline of the statistical trade area. We take 100% of the samples, and then the outline is actually the closest 65% of those samples. So that's an industry-defined trade area. So instead of drawing, this big polygon around an area where we think the trade area starts and stops, this is actually defined on the limits of the barriers of the census tracts. We'll also take the same process and do catchments based on rings and drive times, because you can't compare polygons to polygons, but we can show the relationship of the strength of this is a 7-mile trade area or a 20-minute trade area. We can translate that when we're communicating to the retailer. So this is ultimately our finding. In this geography, we've got over 500,000 people. Huge regional pool. Obviously, that's no surprise. Lewisville is well positioned, kind of in the northern part of the metroplex. Even with that large geography, you've got really a strong median household income of $71,000. Again, very young population base, so we're seeing a significant amount of growth. Even in this area, a lot of it's even further to the west, into the Flower Mound area that we're pulling from, but 12% population increase, and the metrics just getting better. So this is kind of the beginning or the foundation of building that trade area and starting to extract some of the details that we'll use for further analytics. These are the main assets, or the main properties that we've indexed, and we've started property interviews and collecting vacancies. Ultimately, what we want to do is take a look at existing vacancies and even redevelopment strategies to figure out, when we have a list of tenants, how can we program those to individual assets ultimately to create kind of that merchandising plan or the economic value. So these are the main shopping centers that we're analyzing. And then essentially, this is a summary of the overall trade area or our findings. We've got 531 people, very young, affluent. Kind of the overall core of the study area is about 1.5 miles long, with about 1.8 million square feet. And those are the 6 properties. And then we've got very strong traffic counts. Obviously, 1171 is going to be very strategic long. You've got 60,000 cars that we have access to. When we're underwriting each individual trade area, we really, from a retail standpoint, we look for 4 buckets of revenue or wallet share. The majority of this is your 500,000 people that we're going to get from the residential population. But another bucket that we can pull value from is the commuter traffic. And you're at the apex of kind of a very large, wide market area, so we're able to quantify the benefits of the value. We've done a lot of research as it relates to commuter value. We can actually capitalize on about 3 or 4% of those cars traditionally for merchandised correctly, kind of on a daily basis. So there's a way to actually quantify the value of those traffic corridors. And then the other opportunities of revenue sources feeding the demand would be firmographic or workforce. That's the service economy and the hospitals and some of the major employment operators. Those people have to go out to eat for lunch and after dinner, so we can quantify that as well. The other bucket of demand, generally is a visitor economy. I know that's something that Lewisville has been interested in increasing. And there's trips generated by people that are visiting Lewisville that don't work here or aren't just passing through here or don't live here. There's also a way to quantify that. As we defined the geography, we started looking at maybe some of the opportunities or some of the categories where we're seeing the greatest amount of demand. And this is the once we get finished with the overall study for each trade area, this is the leakage for the 1171 corridor, but we actually have to take a look at how all these individual corridors overrelate, because you're not going to be able to capture 100% of the leakage from every corridor. There's going to be an individual strategy from each corridor and how they interrelate with each other. So, for example, grocery stores, if you locate a grocery store, which I know is in the works on 1171, that's going to take part of the market share away from some of the other corridors that maybe overlap and have the same, same overlapping demand. But we're showing, very significant amount of retail gap, almost $750 million. And if you start to quantify the overall square footage demand based on retail sales estimates, you've got about 2.4 million square feet of at least unmet demand in this trade area. Obviously, we've got to look and refine. We're probably not realistic to get 550,000 square feet of grocery store, but certainly 50, 60, 80,000 square feet would be a no-brainer, and I think that's why you're seeing the activity. So ultimately, we're going to take the unmet demand in the marketplace and start to refine this and tailor this down to very specific operators that correlate very well already with this corridor. So we'll look at all these individual brands in categories that are undersupplied and start to match those with very specific operators, and then ultimately apply those to those assets, so that if you have a vacancy, we should have a list of tenants or a game plan for those vacancies, and then we'll refine that process. So just some very highlights. Obviously, 1171 is going to continue to be a strong corridor. It's a dominant linkage. Our goal, essentially, with this is to not only harness kind of a local unmet demand, but in a way, because you're more strategic than kind of your peers to the west, we would like to try to position those operators the best that we can and take advantage of that customer base that is passing this corridor already to go to the west, and make a case or value proposition using data that this, the corridor in Lewisville at the apex, kind of in our study area, would be better positioned than maybe going out to a greenfield site where there's less population base or less metrics to the west. We'll continue to focus on the kind of 6 dominant thoroughfares, and then focus certainly on mitigating that retail leakage of almost $1 billion. So, kind of our recommendations. Ultimately, I think there's an opportunity to just improve the characteristics, kind of the visual characteristics, some landscaping, facade, or work with the developers on an overall program. And that wouldn't necessarily be our role, but I think continue to reinforce and enhance that corridor from the city's perspective. Work with the EDC and the individual property owners to develop a strategy on any gap financing. And certainly we'll be building a very large warehouse of data. But certainly we would want to maintain tenant data, vacancy matrix, and keep that up to date. We'll be doing that through our implementation phase. But I think it's important to have very clear and concise data. As you generate interest, you certainly want to know where the opportunities are to secure the interest. And then continue to coordinate. So through our process, we'll be distributing this information to the brokerage community and the development communities. But I think it's very important for everyone to be informed of the opportunities of the 1171 corridor.
Chase, going back, when you're referring to the improving the physical appearance of the corridor, are you referring to the right-of-way, the roadway, or the adjacent private properties, or both?
Both. And I think there'd be obvious, as in our plans, we'll relate to very kind of bullet point summaries, some specific things that some of these individual properties could do. But you would want to see a consistent thing. This is a great gateway into a very large area of the west, and just kind of maintaining that investment all the way through. And partly the city can help obviously participate in that process. Another study area that we worked on, and I'm actually extremely excited about, is the downtown, kind of the area between downtown and TOD. Obviously the city's already placed a significant amount of investment, and I think we've got a really good position to leverage the investment and create activity. And we're involved in a lot of downtown TOD and downtown, very similar framework we can continue to activate. A little bit different geography, and then that's why it's always interesting to define this based on real customer samples and look at the customer patterns. Obviously, the downtown area has limited amount of retail goods and services. So a lot of the existing customer base is people that already work in the area and or passing through. But I think there's an opportunity to increase this trade area if we can create a district and bring in some more iconic operators that can start to kind of secure and motivate the economic activity. So a little bit smaller geography. This trade area has about 200,000 people. A little bit stronger median income than that wider area. A couple of reasons: it's a smaller geography, and so we're able to capitalize on some of the higher, more affluent areas along the peripheral. Again, kind of a young median age. Those are factors that you certainly want to look for, because those areas have a significant amount more growth than maybe a more of a mature area. But again, 2017, we're still anticipating seeing a 12% growth, so very strong growth. Those are some things that certainly commercial operators would look for. So that the population is 200,000. Obviously, very similar population size than the 1171 corridor. Very strong median house. At least the new household growth is strong, around 350,000. Traffic counts are obviously less. This is still a great commuter thoroughfare, but it's not as strong or strategic as 1171. But still good traffic counts of about 20,000 along Main Street. It's kind of interesting. There's about 117,000, so much less than the amount of gross leasable area in the 1171 corridor, but with a really strong vacancy rate. We got about 22% vacancy rate. And there's obviously some functional obsolescence, some degree, a lot of fractional ownership with kind of different agendas, and through our interview, we've noticed a lot of those are very conservative, kind of in their reinvestment strategy. So as they get tenants, a lot of the tenants have a lower base rate in this area, so that the landlord's not as incentivized to reinvest in the space, and so you've got a big issue. You've got space that has functional obsolescence, and you've got a low rental rate, and we'll talk about strategies of how to kind of mitigate that. But that's really the biggest issue in mitigating the gap, is there's kind of a bid-ask gap on the market.
On that 22%, is that the entire Old Town, downtown area, or is that just a confined specific area you're talking about?
That's the entire Old Town, downtown area. But even in the downtown core, I mean, there's vacancies and quite a bit of turnover. And the problem is that the rental rate doesn't necessarily justify the reinvestment, but you almost need the reinvestment to increase the rental rate. And then, as part of this process, I think it's important as we start implementing the plan and visiting with operators. Part of our process was to go through an inventory of the parking spaces, because there's always a parking perception in downtown areas. But we've been accounting for the parking spaces, and ultimately we'll talk about peak times of parking and availability, and there may be some wayfinding and some things as this district starts to accelerate that could be important from an investment standpoint over time. Yes.
Mayor and Claude, I just wanted to add, of course, this is a concentration area for our 2025 plan, and actually Jason will be working with Lisa Nichols to come up with those strategies specifically for some of the items that was advertised.
We've already had some preliminary conversations, but Freeze and I have a great working relationship, so that'll be easy to translate. Overall strategy is a refinement standpoint. Obviously the downtown core is where most of the current investment has occurred. Logically, that's where, at least in our preliminary conversations, not only on the existing ownership, but we've also started taking some of our findings and really doing some user testing with some developers that we worked with in the past that have been successful in activating these downtown areas. Certainly, very close to City Hall and the theater are probably the most logical places to begin activating this downtown core. In our mind, kind of create the core and get the cluster working and let it mature and grow outward. I think there's a great TOD opportunity, but I would see, on the short term, really working on this southern corridor, maybe with even some density of some residential projects, and certainly an opportunity to start to gather some momentum on some other residential density. And then I think our short-term strategy for downtown would be, again, to cluster it with restaurants. Restaurants are the easiest way to activate kind of a downtown area and create the destination. And the demand is there, the framework is there, and we've actually started talking to operators that are very interested in seeing, kind of the plan and the city's overall vision, but are already would be interested in the marketplace. A little bit different scenario, a few similar categories because there is some overlap in these markets, but strong gap in restaurants. This is more of your, the limited service places would be more of your Panera Breads or your lifestyle type tenants. But QSRs and even full service sit-down restaurants, a huge gap. So we think there's a strong opportunity to start activating those types of tenants initially, and then start to fill in as you create that district to some of the other vacancies and some of the other categories. Certainly downtown's competitive advantage. You've got the city hall, the municipal complexes, already entertainment. You've got a great core framework. I love having the access to the TOD. There is a, when you talk about wallets or values and activating it, the DCTA has limited ridership. So, if you think about people, it's not necessarily natural for someone to get off, go get a Slurpee, and get back on because the frequency between the trains is so wide. It's hard to harness, but I think it would be very logical for someone to live here, or as you start activating some more of the entertainment and get the restaurant cluster, that this could actually be the destination or determination for a lot of those riders. Great population base. There's really no issues with the demographics or the characteristics. We're going to continue to see growth. I think it'd be very easy to build a business case for many operators. And then the good news is other markets like downtown Arlington, we're really running into kind of physical opportunities where there's a lack of infrastructure, there's a lack of availability of inventory. Even though we've got strong demand for some operators, I think Lewisville's a little bit different. You've already got some existing vacancy that could be activated, but you've got a lot of good greenfield pieces that wouldn't take a lot of work from an assemblage standpoint to activate. So I think there's a good framework and core already established, but I think essentially there should be fairly easy to find places to put good operators. So my recommendation here, we're going to try to kickstart this area first as far as recruitment. We've already talked to operators during our user testing, and so we'll be refining those with our implementation plan. And then obviously, as Nick had mentioned, start to work with Freeze and really kind of coordinate some of the public improvements and the design and the vision with kind of our overall merchandising strategy, so this is executed kind of in a linear fashion where we're not having two different agendas. And then really, I think we're going to spend some more time looking at traffic patterns and movements to see some of the roadways that we think we can activate first and where the strongest metrics are. The other study area, a little bit more complicated, is the Hebron TOD corridor. That follows really that TERS 2 boundary. There's about 1,700 multifamily units. Certainly there's some capacity and some design for more multifamily. The challenge here of really activating retail is that you have such a dominant amount of retail already along Interstate 35, and you blend in the kind of limited amount of residential and the physical constraints of that TOD in the TERS area. It's really trying to aggregate enough wallet share to capitalize on to create maybe a new retail district within that core. And so this is a challenge. You've got 3040 and I-35 with really a limited amount of population base. It looks like a lot, but if you start to equate or quantify the amount of residents and where they already are shopping and try to calculate a gap, there's just not a lot of meat on the bone. We spent some time looking at, the ridership of the DCTA. Right now it's limited, it's maturing, but, even factoring that in, it just doesn't have the same kind of metrics. It doesn't have the commuter, really pass by attributes. It's got a limited population base, and, right now there's, not a significant amount of workforce that would be reasonable, logical to kind of pour to this core. But I think, my recommendation would be to set up kind of a retail-ready strategy with some of the future multifamily projects, and to develop, kind of a small core that could, service, more of the residential mix within the district. So I think kind of our findings here with the existing service of I-35 and the retail, there's just not a lot of capacity. It's hard to grow your own in an area this small, where you have enough opportunity to really harness and develop any large, significant retail. We are, I do think there's an opportunity along Huron Parkway. There's a couple of tracks that are in play. We've actually been working with some of the developers that would be more of the restaurants, and kind of continuing the district and extending the bookend of existing retail along 3040. And again, I think the opportunity in this TOD area would really be to create 12,000, 16,000 square feet integrated kind of in the corners of the future multifamily that could service that kind of immediate population base, so that folks don't have to get in their car and go north to Target, or get in their car and go over to 35. And I know eventually there's been some plans for the bridge or the connection where you could actually walk or have a linkage that would service the multifamily anyway. So this is where we are. In the next 2.5, 3 weeks, we're going to be kind of wrapping up our research and our findings, and finishing up property and views. We'll turn in our preliminary draft to Tanika and her department. We're also now profiling tenants, kind of extracting all the data out of the market and beginning to use that data to profile very specific tenants for each one of these districts. Ultimately, there'll be kind of a review process of our draft. And then I would say in the next 30, 45 days at most, we'll have the final plans prepared for each one of these districts. And then once the plan's set, and we have a tenant list for each core study area, we're going to be spending, realistically the next 9 to 12 months, sharing this information and recruiting operators for each one of these districts. And then through that process, on a monthly basis, we'll be reporting operator conversations, our findings, and any interest from operators that can help secure those. And then, ultimately we'll be partnering with Tanika and her staff to share this information with brokers and the developers, so that everyone's informed of the opportunity. The good timing is we'll be setting the data up and finishing the plans prior to ICSC. We spent a lot of time, kind of 30 days prior to May, which will fit the timing of this project perfectly, scheduling meetings with those national operators at ICSC, and certainly Lewisville will be part of that package. With that, if anybody has any questions, at least on this, and for discussion.
And this isn't just for us, this is more of a generic geographical question here. Our geographical area, is it still, and I think they're called the lifestyle malls now, or whatever, like the South Town Center and this type of thing? Is that still a oncoming thing more than the traditional malls, or is some of it starting to go back to the traditional malls?
Yeah, it's interesting. The traditional malls are seeing rental rate increases of 6% and very, very low vacancy. There's just not any formats. I mean, there's not been any new lifestyle, shopping centers for the tenants to grow into, and so they've kind of fallen back and reinforced the traditional mall. I'm not an architect, but I believe in placemaking. I believe in certainly good urban design. I think there's intrinsic value with good design that you can actually quantify, and so I think there's certainly a position for lifestyle centers, or just quality projects that not only provide a place to shop, but provide a framework for an experience. So we're not seeing any trends of change. You know, just there's been a gap in development opportunity because you can't get the equity multiples to work on a new project. And so there's still a lot of money sitting on the sidelines. But Waters Creek, you know, has been a good example of a project that's been absorbed very well. There's been some complexities in that project, more so because, you know, Allen and Fairview came online about the same time with large, heavily public incentives. And so you could go get first generation space up there much cheaper than you could at Waters Creek, although it was, you know, sort of in the same trade area. And so we've seen a lot of tenants that would have gone to Waters Creek go to Fairview and Allen just because the base rent was below market for first generation space with very heavy TI packages due to the subsidies. So kind of a long answer. I think lifestyle centers will continue to be relevant.
May I ask any questions?
So what are you seeing as the low-hanging fruit in this project right now?
You know, 1171, I think a grocery store is a no-brainer. I mean, I sort of hate to take claim to that because there's already that activity working, but you know, there's a huge gap there. There's certainly unmet need. You know, the grocers haven't reformatted themselves in a while. There's a lot of new kind of exciting formats that are out and looking for spots. And I think 1171 or Lewisville is just, you know, kind of a no-brainer for people to expand. I mean, if you take a look at the gap of grocery, which an operator would do, this would certainly be, you know, high on that list. You've got, for the same reasons, you're at the apex of 1171, I-35, even though there's you know, future construction, these are good corridors to locate on. Restaurants, both sit down in QSRs or fast food uses. There's been, you know, a lot of new formats. You know, a lot of people want to take advantage of market share. And, you know, 1171 is going to be fairly traditional. I mean, you know, it's fairly well defined. I don't see any, you know, major transformation of properties in what I would consider 0 to 3 years, other than reformatting, you know, or framing in opportunities for some of the new anchors. I think the downtown TOD area is going to be extremely exciting. I think there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of unmet capacity, and you've already done a great job investing in that market. And operators want to see that. I mean, they want to see the vision. They want to see the investment from the public sector. I think the challenge there will be just getting the property owners, you know, kind of mindset right to accept the opportunity. And you know, the first 3 or 4 are going to be real hard, but once we locate, you know, those first 3 or 4, probably restaurants, very niche operators. I think they have to be destination operators to begin with. Be careful mentioning names, but you know, stuff that you might see in downtown Arlington or stuff that you might see in Roanoke that are very unique in destination. I think we got a great chance of harnessing and activating that market. I mean, if downtown's, I mean, you've got the framework. It's a cool place. It needs to be, you know, turned on.
So, and this may be for another conversation, but while I've got your expertise here, I see a lot of bar, restaurant in the space, kind of that's the activator for a lot of different projects around the country. Do you see that getting diversified, or do you see that really more concentrating more in the bars and restaurants with the advent of traditional retail being shopped by Amazon? And you know, I'm gonna have 24-hour turnaround when I buy something. I can buy it from Target. I can buy that Target product at Amazon at 10% off.
You know, I'm very active at the state level with ICSC. We're you know, very concerned about the Main Street Fairness Act, and you know, I do a lot of shopping on Amazon, but we did a program recently, you know, webinar on kind of the internet shopping, you know, and the implications, and actually, and I think we'll see Amazon having physical, you know, store locations very soon. So that could be very interesting. But actually, the brick and mortar stores have a 30% increase if there's an online presence. So there's actually a symbiotic relationship between you know, online shopping and internet. Lowe's and a lot of those formats have kind of figured that out. It's just another channel or another distribution channel for a lot of these retailers to figure out how to activate it. So I don't see really the threat there in the short run. So it actually enhances sales.
Any other questions? King, what would you like to do next? Oh, I'm sorry, you're not here.
He probably had to take a phone call.
I've got one.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I guess, if you want to set the framework, I guess there's a little discussion on kind of the case study.
I think a question came up, or some council members have talked with Claude about what's Farmers Branch doing in terms of revitalizing the area. They have a very strong program, both in the residential and commercial revitalization. So we wanted to kind of take a look to see what they are doing, and that's what Jason has done for us. So we just kind of give you a very quick snapshot recap of what's going on, or what it is.
So this is, I guess, a case study on some of the tools or tool that Farmers Branch has been using. So I'll give you a little bit of history. Back in 2008, is kind of most conversations start with the city, and I wasn't involved in these conversations, but the city of McDougal was involved heavily in the redevelopment around Lubbock or Texas Tech. Started visiting, and I think the conversation with McDougal was that maybe the developer said, hey, maybe we can get the city to set up a fund. Farmers Branch was interested in redevelopment, so McDougal suggested maybe the city to set up a fund to fund property purchases. Essentially, the developer would use the fund to kind of repay the projects and kind of reinvest in that pool. And essentially, kind of on a project-by-project basis, the city and the developer would enter into kind of a development agreement for that strategy. The developer would actually be in charge of doing the acquisition of the properties and really all the heavy lifting, the abatement, demolition, and they all also would work together on design and planning. In this case, the developer would be involved in the master planning, but the city, I guess the proposal was that the city would actually pay for those planning that process.
Just back to the history part of it, the reason they're doing that is because, of course, old properties that are sitting there vacant, going downtown, reducing the tax value, and what do you do with it?
And they've got to stop herding elephants through that hallway.
Maybe a scuffle. They're over here now fighting.
So basically, you're either losing your tax base, and it continues to decline, or you need to do something very drastic. And Farmers Branch being an older city, again, that tertiary city where we are, and having some areas that are really dragging the city down.
Yeah, there was a very specific intersection that had been challenged for a while. And so ultimately, the goal would be, the developer to also help kind of construct a TIF and help kind of define, very creatively those agreements. This is a situation. We met Farmers Branch probably in 2010. I think we were the 8th consultant, if I remember right, that had been engaged in some sort of study and plan and refinement and vision. And so we looked at it and gathered context. Essentially, you had the vacant Albertsons. They've been closed and been shop for a while without any movement. And through, I guess, Robert Charles Lesser, Alcielco, kind of developed an overall vision plan for what the city had defined as the 4 corners. And then, tons of code violations, neglect, very tough property owners. So ultimately, they qualified these buildings as dangerous structure. City Council obviously had to agree on that, and it was my understanding the Attorney General actually had to kind of endorse those findings. So the city actually put together a resolution claiming those properties as dangerous structure. And then on 2009, the city actually, originally they went to issue bonds, and the bond failed. I think they were originally pursuing a $30 million bond. So they actually issued COs and then engaged McDougal to do all the acquisition. So ultimately McDougal was engaged in the overall contract to kind of on a monthly basis to acquire properties, and then and ultimately was involved in putting together a development agreement to acquire the Albertsons and several other properties. The biggest challenge is there was a strip center that was included in this property, and the city and the Google actually had to work through all those individual leases, and several of those were long-term, and a lot of the tenants were holdouts. So they had to fund up and spend quite a bit of money on buying out those leases as well. So essentially, McDougall was not only involved in the acquisition, but they were getting fees to do that process as well. So the original CO issue was 10. After they spent the money, there's about $3 million left in the balance, and then these are the very specific uses: acquiring structures and demolishing. Those were the two processes that the city had.
Jason,
Yes, sir.
what was the date on that Dallas morning?
2000, July 15, 2009.
Okay.
When we got engaged, I guess the city wanted to develop an implementation plan. We looked at it and said, okay, you can follow the vision, which was more of a mixed-use strategy, which certainly long-term would be great from kind of a lifestyle standpoint. We looked at the market and it had a lot of risk. The office market is flat. There hasn't been much movement and actually negative absorption. There was definitely capacity for retail, but in the format, we didn't see a lot of two-story opportunities. The city wasn't very interested in doing a lot of high-density multifamily. So our strategy was fairly thin, even though the vision was fairly grand. And then we looked at it on more of a traditional model and said, we think there's certainly an opportunity to bring in retail, but that's not necessarily the mixed-use format. And the city had to make some decisions in that standpoint. If they went the mixed-use route, there was a much larger gap, much larger risk, and they were the owner at this point, and they needed to certainly pay back. I mean, they were sort of in the developer's shoes. They had to pay back eventually the bond and service the debt. We made some phone calls on some tenants that had profiled fairly strong. That was when Walmart just announced that they were interested in doing more of their neighborhood markets. I think they're planning on doing maybe 300 across Texas. We were kind of early in contacting them. This was a perfect fit for them. The Midway Walmart was really undersized and at capacity, and so we were just picking up overflow from that for the most part. With that activity, we were able to quickly activate a restaurant here, and then there's another 6 or 8 acres left that could be developed right now. So, city sold to Walmart back in 2011, late 2011. That's already open. The city had, let's see if I can get, the city had entered into an agreement with an operator for this. That's actually now open as well with Panda Express. And currently they're working on a strategy to develop kind of a service type business with maybe a sit-down pad site for a full-service restaurant. This is a breakdown of just kind of how that fund went. Originally $10 million, $5.25 million for the Albertsons, another $1.5 million in lease acquisitions. They were able to capitalize the sale of Walmart and capitalize the sale to a QSR. There is another offer on the table to a restaurant right now. We're trying to figure out how to program that for approximately $600. They're in a position where they've got to really work out the balance of the property in a strategy in a cohesive manner. You can't activate the front without necessarily activating the back at the same time. So they're in a tough position because they're really having to think like a developer, not just the physical implications of the decision. So this is a very high-level summary, but I'll be more than happy to answer any questions, at least of our activity in this project. I do know that when you run the economic impact out on just the Walmart, their anticipated sales, it was just a little over 7-year payback. So to the total investment, so again, fairly short window of reinvestment. Hopefully that answers some of your question on at least how they're utilizing that strategy.
So I guess one question I have is Walmart's stays pretty busy looking at real estate and opportunities, and necessarily go cannibalize their own store and where they have opportunity on it. So why didn't they find this?
You know, they hadn't been looking, to be honest with you. I mean, I think it's one of those things, you know, sometimes you want to be good and sometimes you want to be lucky. I think our timing was just right. We recognized some things, I think brought some things to the table and some of the city investments, but in this case, I think our timing, you know, the real challenge was is we had 2 or 3 operators and we had to pick a horse. That was the biggest challenge, and there was a couple of operators that were kind of geared more toward different ethnic mixes, and so I think the biggest challenge of the grocery, the opportunity was there, but we just had to pick the horse. So.
When you said payback, well, Walmart, you talking about payback in the form of sales taxes and property taxes?
Property taxes and sales tax, yes.
Yeah. 7 years.
So, as I've been looking at this over the last couple of years, what I see are the 2 models, and maybe you can give me a little more insight. We have model 1, which is a traditional city model where a developer or operator comes in and they say, we want X number of abatements and property tax and these types of things, so we pay that out on the back end. Or we can take these distressed properties and maybe step in on the front end, take on maybe a bit more risk, but we don't necessarily have to put the abatements in on the back end because there's not as much work for the developer to rehab a property or deal with a brownfield or something like that. Are those pretty much the 2 sides of the coin that we're looking at?
I guess I haven't been asked the question. I think this scenario, and it's going to actually work out very well. I know from an economic standpoint that the agri strategy is wide. I think they'll come out good, but this is a lot larger risk profile. I mean, you know, the situation I would say would have to be fairly extreme. And in this case, it probably was. I mean, I wasn't involved in the history, but there's been a lot of work and a lot of effort to really start to catalyze this intersection. I don't see the city, in essence, reinvesting in the intersection. I think this project alone, and it already has, will start to catalyze other economic development on its own. So, you know, I think the city probably would take the risk profile. This wouldn't necessarily be a recommended strategy on, you know, on every property in the market.
It'd be a cherry pick.
You'd have to really, yeah, it'd be a cherry pick. Most of the economic incentives we're seeing are fairly similar to what you're doing. It's finite, it's fixed, it's performance-based, so that you know, really most of the risk, or almost all the risk, is shifted to the developer, and then assuming that the project's right, the developer and the operator have confidence in it, and maybe you help bridge some of the gaps, you know, through some sales tax rebatement or even property tax freeze and some of those tools.
And I look at what we have for inventory and you know, compared to some of our sister cities, greenfield versus a building I've got a lot of investment to do with little value of the property currently, and so we've got to kind of walk that line.
There may be some tools, you know, I think downtown early on, you know, may require some capitalization or some partnership that's been, you know, fairly successful with some cities, some grants, you know, to some of these operators that are, you know, that are regional and credit worthy, that, you know, may have a few on where there may be a little bit of investment, but I think it would be limited to the overall investment that the operator would have to make. But you know, sometimes it starts to bridge the gap and helps encourage creating that market. But I think it is, you know, I don't think there's any specific property that I could think of, at least in the study areas that we're working with where this severe a tool or this amount of exposure will be required. Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me.
Okay, thank you.
No PowerPoint.
Were we gonna do the residential?
Oh, I'm going to do you want to?
Yeah.
I didn't know if you.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Jason, would you cover the residential just very briefly? The residential piece, do you have it? Or-
I apologize, I didn't bring that with me.
Okay. I had it on my computer, if you can, could you connect? We can talk about it, though, you know, I mean.
Yeah, if you want to just operate off this, there's another program over there that involves, it's kind of a similar approach, but it's on the residential side.
I'll tell you what.
I don't know if PJ, you have a question, or one that have interested in this, and I'll apply to the residential side as well.
Yeah, we've got a couple minutes.
Sure.
We're running ahead of schedule, that's great.
6, Mika has a economic development report. We're not going to be going over this with you in any great detail or really any detail at all. It's there for your information. I know there's been some, maybe some community talk, et cetera, about how we do economic development or what we're doing, and I'm not sure that you all especially had a strong feel for the level of activity and workload and the things that the department has been involved with over the course of the last several years. So that's what the purpose of this is give you some of that basic information about what Nika and her staff have been dealing with or doing for the past year. This is kind of an annual report that they put together that really summarizes quite nicely a lot of the little pieces of the puzzle that have been going on. Everything from the I-35 corridor plan to the land use mapping, the special use permitting process that we're going to be talking about later on, plaza, Old Town sign ordinance, the neighborhood committee report. All these things are little pieces of the puzzle that you may see because you're only dealing with them every so often as not connected, but they really are all connected. And I think this does a good job of putting that together. It also does a good job of describing some of the very specific economic development activities that we're involved with. A lot of times you don't hear about them. A lot of times the community doesn't hear about them. Sometimes because they don't necessarily always materialize. That doesn't mean we're not spending time and effort trying to get some of these projects landed. So the tail end of that report deals with some of those projects that they've been involved with just in the past year. And that's an ongoing process basically all the time. So if you have any questions on that, let us know. I really encourage you to spend some time just kind of glancing through that and understanding how all these little pieces of the puzzle fit in. And that's going to be a critical element of the 2025 process too, that those committees need to understand how these pieces of the puzzle fit together. You as really the ultimate steering committee need to understand that too. Because when you set those vision plans and those actions for the future, they're going to have to incorporate a lot of this and the seamless whole. And so the more you understand how all those pieces fit together, the better off you will be along that one.
Have we got this posted online? Is there an
Some of it
option?
is confidential, a lot of it we can post, absolutely. If I could just kind of continue with what Claude was saying, actually the 2025 plan will bring all of these pieces together. So you will see a whole at the end of the 2025 plan, which then gives us opportunity to basically jump and leap forward with a lot of implementation plans and see the goals and visions that you want to see. The unfortunate part of economic development is that it just doesn't happen in one day. It just takes a long, long time to see the vision and the goal come to fruition. And I think Jason, what he said was you have to work the back to work the front. And this is what we've been doing. We've been working the back side in order to move forward on the front side. And you will see, Claude and I had a lot of philosophical discussion at the time about what is economic development. And it is truly everything. It is public safety. It is your quality of residential. It's your quality of retail. It is what you guys discussed last night with the visual impact of our streets, landscaping, gateways. It's everything. It's code enforcement. It's one of our largest economic development assets, and we will give credit to everybody, city council, city staff. It's truly our development process. I mean, that's what gets us a lot of kudos because the Eric staff and how we deal with development. Time is money. When we our development process streamlined, you get economic development. So basically, planning and economic development are so tied together. You gotta have planning in order to reach your economic development. And that's primarily the article that Councilman Gilmore sent us to truly define what it is and what we've been doing. So.
Well, and the reason I asked if this was online, and I'm sure you've heard this because you guys have been doing this a lot more, but I'd say the single biggest grumble I get regularly is what's economic development doing? And part of the nature of the beast means that they can't know. So anything we can do to make sure that our residents know dev team is kicking butt and taking names. Because I think we are really working hard, and they're probably one of the more aggressive departments in this area, based on my knowledge. Anything we can do to help with that perception, because when Parks does something great, we see it. When Streets does something great, we see it. When Echo Dev does something great, we don't see it for a month, a year, 2 years. You know, Aldi took forever. And you know, people love Aldi now, but that was, when are they gonna be here? So, anything we can do to help with that impression, I think, is a great thing, because
Well,
I think you guys are doing
to
good
the
work.
extent that this report can be published in total, or maybe with a couple minor reductions, that would certainly help, I think, the average citizen understand what all we've been going on.
I think what we're doing with Catalyst is great, and anything that we can share with that, I think is gonna be helpful, and to let people know, hey, we have a vision and a strategy set out for the city. It's not just, well, we're sitting back and waiting for somebody to fill in one of our plazas. We're actually out there fishing and hunting, and we'll land one of them. It may take time.
You're talking about this section 6, it's online. Starts on page 157 of the PDF that's on the back of my shirt.
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe
he's talking
more,
about just-
more out front, like on the website.
Part of the website or
Oh,
something.
there's a separate, yeah, it could be
Yeah.
pulled off as a separate PDF. That's, yeah.
As part of our process, and I think this will be helpful along that note, I mean, probably on a bi-monthly basis at least, we'll be reporting to NECA, those operators that we're tracking. So, ultimately we'll have, 53 operators, but we track essentially the tax value of the land and start to predict. So probably 90 days into the process, we'll have very specific operators. Now, we won't report the names, but categories and sales tax value of the stuff that we're recruiting and implementing. So I think that'll be helpful for me to report back.
And I like that, because energy creates energy. So people start seeing that, and then other operators might go, oh, well, we need to be looking.
But we don't look at this as more of an activity-based process. It really is how much real value can, nominal real value can be created in this process. So,
Thank you. They're just my thoughts. Take them for what they are.
Okay, so cut
We
the
love it.
residential. This is, again, residential is a major part of your curriculum. Having the stabilized residential base and the quality of residential really is into the economic model and economic development model. And again, this is a farmer's branch. A lot of other cities have used similar programs to, especially the older cities, stabilize their base and stabilize residential. One of the things we're focusing on in this time is actually also finding niche areas for new residential development, so we can get new inventory online, and higher quality inventory. But in the meantime, doing something with your existing inventory is also very, very important. And this is an example of that program. And it was very interesting because they have very, very small programs to very, very large programs. So it's a tier-based.
And I apologize in advance. I'm not very familiar with the very, very small programs. I know they've got some cash grants. We have been, I guess, kind of working with the city on some of the lots, not directly, but we have some knowledge of those through the coordinator. But essentially, there's 3 programs. I guess the very, very small program is kind of more of a grant or rebate, and that's just for kind of exterior makeover improvements. So, the resident would come, and this would be more for, soffit improvements or, kind of cosmetic repairs. I guess currently Farmers Branch has kind of a minimum bar of about $2,000. And there's some freezing or rebates on any of the permits or fees. And then there's actually kind of a very small cash grant that the city would have available for that applicant. So currently, the city's had 53 applicants. The average improvement value was $11,000, and the gross incentives paid is $34,000. And I don't know the source of the funding that they're using, but we'll find that out. Kind of the next tier, I guess, the middle program would be for remodels. I know that the minimum bar on those would be roughly $50,000 or more for improvements. A little bit higher level of cash grant available, 2% cash grant. Fewer residents have taken advantage of it. I think only 6 to date, and the average improvement value of those remodels is about $110,000. And one I'm most familiar with. They've got kind of a pool. They've been really working on out-of-state owners, maybe rental product. It's been vacant for a few months, and I know that they've got a liaison that goes in and contacts the ownership and acquires those structures. And then they've been buying basically kind of neglected structures and demolishing those, and then basically turning them back on the market and offering them for sale, basically at tax value. So wherever that's been the floor on the tax value. There's been 3. I think it's last year that took advantage of the incentives. The average lot value has been around $70,000. And I'll show you a couple of examples. There's also been some cash incentives given with that. But this is that demo rebuild program. 8 applications, 6 new homes have been built. Original valuation of land was $1.5 million, and current valuation of land with the improvements is now $3.9. So the valuation increase is about $2.4 million. So this is an example of kind of some of those rebuild. Original tax value was $161. Current value is $797 on this one. Again, original value was $97, and then current value is $612. And then original value on this one was $97. Current value is $459. So this is the one I'm most familiar with, where they're just going in and basically buying some of the vacant lots or existing homes, but scraping them and offering the rebuild program.
And they give this applies to developers. So if a builder comes in and does that, they would apply that. Ultimately, the rebate goes to the homeowner. They also have some tax rebate, property tax rebate for 7 years, basically. But they also give that to a builder that wants to come and scrape it.
So if they have to buy the property for more than the land cost, they're just absorbing that as part of the cost of the program?
Correct.
Do they have any kind of projected payback?
On each one of those, I
Basically on the whole program, I guess. When they look at what they've done on these and then what it takes to recoup or.
I haven't ran that out, but obviously just be on an ad valorem basis. It would be interesting to do, and I'd be more than happy to do that. So I'll send that to Nika, and she can distribute it out.
And again, it may not be dollar for dollar value.
Right.
Because you have so many intangibles when you get a property from $97,000 into a $500,000 property. It's just there's so many intangibles.
These are really kind of individual seed cows, but I think it'd be interesting to understand how they're qualifying that investment and how they're measuring the success. Even if it is the intangible, what are all the hard measurables? And I don't know that, other than I would say that obviously the tax value, there had to be some sort of payback period that can be quantified, but there may be some other measurables that they're doing.
Right, I would think.
Overall neighborhood values, does that increase? I think that'd be fairly easy to monetize.
Right, I think that would be a big part of it, is like I say, it's a seed. It's a seed implementation there, which it turns, increases the value of the surrounding neighborhood because of what they do with it, how they start improving their property and so on and so forth.
I'd be interested in that, so I'll be more than happy to do the analysis. I mean, certainly, that'd be fairly easy to do, and I'll report those findings back to Nika.
How long has this project been going on for them, do you know?
I believe this has been going on probably 4 years, 3-4 years.
I think it's
Richardson
to
has.
see what they've done, what the areas around it, what the homes around it and everything have done since then.
And Nika mentioned Richardson's also doing a similar program, so it'd be interesting to kind of do a comparative set on both of those. I'm less familiar, I'm not as focused on residential, but we're able to gather some information. Thank you
Because
very
we
much.
do have some properties like that that are owned rather large lots that are just not very well valued on the tax road, but it's not because the lot's so large, but because of the structure that's on it.
Right.
You go in there and buy that and build a big structure on that large lot.
Some of the stuff around the lake?
Right. Well, it's spread all over town. If you just look, there's spots here and there where there's a place that has an 1 or 2 acre lot, and it's a little,
And
Right.
And I personally, I like anything when we start looking at Richardson, they have a lot of similarities to us, a lot. From population to median income to ages to households, they've just, to age, there's a lot of similarity between this city and I know they're not, I don't think they're one of our 16, are they? Okay. So anytime you get that.
I noticed, I guess, and I don't know, I don't have a history on your HOAs, but I know Richardson's HOAs are very, very, very active, very politically active. So,
We don't have.
yeah, I mean, there's probably not an area that there's not an HOA kind of, you know, in some aspects driving initiatives, and so that's, you know, that's kind of fairly new. We don't see HOAs that are that well organized and are that large and have that well attended. I think that helps put some pressure on some things.
If you look at that, it might be helpful to see how they incorporated some of those HOAs, because I got a feeling Richmond, like us, they're a pretty old community. And that initially, they may not have been HOAs, and they went back in there somehow and formed HOAs for certain areas. I don't know that, but I would.
I know there's a lot of voluntary HOAs.
Yeah. Right, but then they've got a lot of areas that were built way before HOAs. I wonder if they're incorporating HOAs into some of that area. Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting. I've got relationships there as well, so we'll try to kind of get a comparative set and maybe do a little bit more deeper dive into the case study, so you can see those things. This is not our, you know, necessarily not our traditional space, but we've got relationships in both markets, so I think we can help you, at least if you're interested in this program, get some intel. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, Mayor, if you want to take a break here and give the next presenter time to set up.
Okay, take about a 5-10 minute break. We'll set up.